Well, the fact was that in the 1980s we had this very new issue of AIDS, and there was uncertainty about it to begin with, and then there was the certainty that we had no drugs to treat people with HIV, and we obviously had no vaccine either. So you had to take some other means, and obviously two things you could do. The first was public education, advertising, very controversial at the time, but actually proved to be very successful, that we warned people about HIV, we sent leaflets to every household, we had television advertisements, we had posters around the country. And the result was that HIV came down, and actually, curiously, perhaps not curiously, other sexual disease came down as well. So that was one. And then the other thing was injecting drug users. Now, we obviously used publicity there as well, but the obvious thing that you could do, as long as people would agree, was to distribute clean needles. And that's exactly what, after a certain struggle, we managed to achieve. And that has proved, in the long term, spectacularly successful, in as much as it's been followed, obviously followed in this country, followed in other countries as well. And HIV being caused by that route has come down dramatically, 1 or 2% of new cases. Is that we created a special AIDS committee, and we had half the cabinet, I think, on it. Willie Whitelaw was in the chair, and suddenly the whole mood changed. I mean, up to that point I'd been putting my points to a general Home Affairs committee. Now I had a specialist committee, and they became involved in it as well. And that was the crucial stepping point. If I'd done it the other way, if we'd kept in this rather generalised way, we wouldn't have been able to do it anything like as quickly. We must have had, if this committee, and I know it doesn't sound much to the outside world, but I can tell you in cabinet terms it's a lot. We must have had 7 or 8 special committee meetings of cabinet ministers in the space of about 2 months. And in that time, policy got changed and got developed. I'm not saying there weren't struggles. There were struggles, obviously. I mean, there was a struggle on the use of clean needles. I mean, there were a lot of people who said that this condoned crime, etc. In Scotland, that was an argument, although they had the worst problem. They were very reluctant about it. But then it was seen to be successful. On the publicity side, it was controversial with some of the columnists in the newspapers outside. I'm not sure that it was so controversial in government. That was relatively easy to get through. The only thing we ever failed to get through was I was going to do a ministerial broadcast, and my shadow minister had agreed, he didn't want a reply, and then Margaret Thatcher intervened and said no. She hadn't had a ministerial broadcast on any other issue, hadn't had a ministerial broadcast on the Falklands, and she certainly wasn't going to have a ministerial broadcast on HIV/AIDS. But that was it. In the main, she grumbled a bit about our policies, but in the main, she did what other leaders didn't do. She didn't get in the way. If you went over the Atlantic to Ronald Reagan, I mean, they just did nothing. I mean, I went there in '87 to see what they were doing, and to be blunt, the government weren't doing very much. There were other countries at the beginning as well. Australia, I think, was a little bit behind us, but not very much. France was about the same as we were, and then it became apparent to everyone that this was a policy that perhaps emotionally politicians thought, whoa, I don't like the look of this, but then they found that it worked. And you couldn't argue really with the statistics, you couldn't argue with the figures. And the only thing you could say was, or grumble about, was, would this increase crime? Well, it didn't. That was also established. So around the world you had this, but not all around the world. I mean, the Russians, for example, still don't. The Russians refuse point blank to go this way. They have their own policy, which is monumentally unsuccessful, which is a policy of sort of cold turkey, of literally restraining people, and then thinking about rehabilitation, which so often doesn't happen. They try to force people off drugs. Doesn't work. People are back on drugs within months, and almost everybody by the end of the year. The Americans aren't that good at it either. I mean, the president would have loved to have continued with this policy, but Congress won't finance it. So it's left to the individual states, California, New York, states like that, to do it for themselves. Thank goodness they've got that sort of system. They can do it. But with the Russians, of course, centralized system, no one does it. And now, you know, when the Russians take over in Crimea, then people who were on these kind of schemes, methadone and the rest, I mean, just come off it because the Russians won't do it.
Presumably with devastating results.
Yes, I mean, the figure, I mean, if you look at the figures for Russia, you see new cases of HIV going up remorselessly year by year. Now, it's true, obviously, in every country you have new cases of HIV, but the rate of increase has tended to come down. In Russia, it continues to go up. And I think it's a policy of neglect on their part, but there is nothing anyone can do about it to change their mind. In a small way, I tried to persuade public health people they're not interested in doing it. Public health ministers aren't interested in doing it, and they claim their policies are a great success. I can't quite see on what basis they claim that, but that's what they claim. I think we've got a good record on public health in this country. It's one of the great things about the National Health Service, incidentally. If I go to the United States, what you find there, I'd always taken the view that if you got people onto antiretroviral drugs, there'd been such a struggle to do that, then they'd stay on it. Not at all. People come off it. They don't. They feel better. In the United States, the insurance system is such that sometimes you can afford it, sometimes you can't. Great thing about the UK is the National Health Service provides a certainty and an assurance that you can continue with this treatment. So I think the challenge could be that local authorities might have other priorities, might have other choices, might even have the public saying, you know, better to go and treat those people rather than these drug users over there don't look very attractive lot to us. I hope they will resist that. It's a great challenge, I think, for local authorities. And I hope that we will find them developing new and sensible ways. What I hope we won't find is that they cut back on this area because it doesn't make any sense. And particularly something like clean needles, methadone. I mean, it's a remarkably cost-effective program. And what one doesn't want is to go to a system where you find people ending up in hospital, and that costs, I mean, it puts the total cost of the whole program, I mean, it starts escalating as a result. The Department of Health, when we were doing the select committee, and I checked this 3 times, I couldn't believe it, spent £4.9 million a year on publicity from the Department of Health. We said, this is ridiculous, so you've got to spend more. So what do? They cut it to 4.5 million a year. So there's that. The Department of Health spent, but what they will say is that some of the health authorities spend, and they do. But even if we're spending 10 million a year, you know, all told, it still compares ridiculously with the amount that we're spending on treatment. I'm not advocating we should cut treatment. What I am saying is that you need to have an emphasis on prevention as well as treatment. You can't just think that treatment is the only thing. You've got to try and prevent people, getting HIV, getting hepatitis C, all these things. And we're not very good at that because governments tend to say, right, well, I can see that person over there, he obviously needs treatment, so we'll provide money for that. What they can't seem to envisage is there are lots of people over there who are in danger and must be persuaded not to go down a particular road. And it makes sense in terms of investment and cost effectiveness as well as plain humanity. So, we battle on this, but the Treasury are not good on giving money for advertising and things of that sort. They say it can't be established. It can be established what we can achieve here. And a balanced programme has both. It has obviously treatment, but it also has prevention as well.